Hey there, night owls and insomniacs. Tonight we're diving deep into the twisted world of Greek mythology, where gods had family drama that makes your Thanksgiving dinner look like a peaceful meditation retreat. Forget what Hollywood and those sanitized children's books have told you. The real Greek myths are filled with blood, betrayal, and the kind of nightmares that would make Freud reach for something stronger than cocaine. So settle in, close your eyes, and let's journey back to a time when the stars were gods, and the shadows held secrets older than civilization itself. The air of ancient Greece wasn't filled with philosophical debates and democracy, as much as it was permeated with the constant fear that some deity might be watching you take a bath and deciding whether you'd make a good swan rape victim or tree. That's right, transformation into foliage was considered a merciful fate in a world where gods treated humans like particularly entertaining ants under a divine magnifying glass. Let's start at the beginning. And I mean the very beginning. Before Zeus and his dysfunctional family, before humans, before even the earth itself had taken shape. In the beginning, there was only chaos. Not the kind of chaos in your sock drawer or your dating life, but primordial, universe-encompassing chaos. From this cosmic soup emerged Gaia, Mother Earth herself, who promptly gave birth to Uranus, the sky. And then, in a move that would set the tone for all Greek mythology to follow, she married her own son. Family relationships in Greek mythology have always been complicated, to say the least. Gaia and Uranus had children, lots of them. The Titans, enormous and powerful beings, were born first. Then came the Cyclopes, those charming one-eyed fellows, and finally the Hecatonchires, giants with 100 hands and 50 heads each. Imagine the nightmare of trying to find gloves for those guys, or hats, or keeping track of which face said what during arguments. Uranus, being father of the year material, hated his children, especially the ugly ones. He took one look at the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires and said, "Nope," and promptly stuffed them back into Gaia's womb. Yes, you heard that right. He shoved his fully grown children back into their mother. Take a moment to visualize that anatomical impossibility while you drift closer to sleep. Now, having multiple giant beings trapped inside you isn't exactly comfortable, and Gaia was understandably upset. She crafted a great stone sickle and asked her Titan children, "Which one of you has the guts to castrate your father?" Because nothing says maternal guidance like encouraging patricide and genital mutilation. Only Kronos, the youngest Titan, stepped forward. Waiting until Uranus was asleep, or rather while he was spreading himself across Gaia to mate, the Greeks weren't subtle, Kronos took the sickle and sliced off his father's genitals, tossing them into the sea. From the divine blood that splattered, the Furies were born, vengeful goddesses who hounded those who committed crimes against family members. From the sea foam mixed with Uranus's severed parts rose Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Nothing says romance quite like being spawned from your grandfather's dismembered genitalia. With Uranus out of the picture, Kronos became the ruler of the cosmos. He freed his siblings, except for the 100-handed ones and the Cyclopes, whom he kept imprisoned because apparently the apple doesn't fall far from the dysfunctional family tree. He married his sister Rhea because, again, keeping it in the family was kind of their thing. Kronos soon learned that one of his children would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his father. Determined to avoid this fate, he came up with the perfectly reasonable solution of swallowing each of his children whole at birth. Rhea watched in horror as her husband gulped down Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades and Poseidon like they were shots at a divine frat party. When her 6th child, Zeus, was about to be born, Rhea had enough. She hid the baby in a cave on Crete and handed Kronos a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes instead. Kronos, who apparently couldn't tell the difference between a rock and a baby, swallowed it without question. This says a lot about either the size of Titan babies or Kronos' commitment to not looking at what he was eating. Zeus grew up safe from his father's digestive tract, raised by nymphs who fed him honey and goat's milk. Once grown, he disguised himself as Kronos' cupbearer and served the Titan King a special drink, a mixture of mustard and wine that acted as the universe's first emetic. Kronos vomited so violently that all of Zeus's siblings came back up. fully grown and understandably irritated after spending years marinating in stomach acid. Together, Zeus and his siblings declared war on Kronos and the other Titans. This wasn't just a family squabble, it was a 10-year cosmic battle called the Titanomachy. Zeus released the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires from their prison in Tartarus, and they showed their gratitude by crafting weapons for the gods, a thunderbolt for Zeus, a trident for Poseidon, and a helmet of invisibility for Hades. Because nothing says thank you for freeing us from eternal torment like a nice handcrafted gift. The war was brutal and reshaped the very landscape of the world. The Hecatonchires hurled mountains at the Titans, while the gods fought with their new divinely crafted weapons. Eventually, Zeus and his siblings emerged victorious. They chained up most of the Titans and cast them into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, with the 100-handed ones as their jailers. Imagine spending eternity being guarded by the very beings you once imprisoned. Calm as a bitch, even for immortals. With the Titans defeated, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew lots to divide up rulership of the cosmos. Zeus got the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades, who clearly drew the short straw, ended up with the underworld. The earth was to be shared by all, though Zeus, being Zeus, mostly considered it his personal playground for seduction. Now, let's talk about Zeus for a moment. If Greek mythology had a horniest deity contest, Zeus would win by an Olympus-sized margin. His sexual appetite was so voracious that it's a wonder he found time to actually rule the cosmos. Zeus's approach to romance was simple: see, want, transform, seduce. Sometimes the transformation was his own disguise: a bull, a swan, a shower of gold, an eagle. Other times, it was the unfortunate aftermath for his lovers when his jealous wife Hera discovered the affairs. Speaking of Hera, let's appreciate for a moment that the goddess of marriage was stuck in perhaps the worst marriage in mythological history. Zeus cheated on her constantly, fathered dozens of illegitimate children, and generally made a mockery of their union. Yet despite being a powerful goddess in her own right, Hera usually directed her rage not at her philandering husband, but at his lovers and offspring. This might be the earliest recorded case of misdirected anger in relationship counselling history. Take poor Io, for instance. This beautiful priestess caught Zeus's wandering eye. When Hera nearly caught them together, Zeus transformed Io into a white heifer to hide her. Hera, no fool, requested the cow as a gift and set hundred-eyed Argus to guard it, ensuring Zeus couldn't change her back or visit her. Zeus eventually sent Hermes to bore Argus to death with endless stories and free Io. But Hera then sent a gadfly to sting the cowgirl relentlessly, driving her to wander the earth in torment. All because Zeus couldn't keep his lightning bolt in his chiton, or consider Semele, another of Zeus's mortal lovers. Hera, disguised as an old woman, convinced her to ask Zeus to reveal himself in his true divine form. When Zeus reluctantly complied, the full glory of his godhood incinerated Semele on the spot. Talk about a relationship that burns too hot. Even Europa wasn't safe. Zeus transformed himself into a magnificent white bull to attract the Phoenician princess. When she climbed on his back, he swam across the sea to Crete, where he revealed his true identity, and, well, you can guess the rest. Europa became the queen of Crete and mother to Minos, who would later commission the labyrinth to house his wife's half-bull offspring. But that's another disturbing story. Zeus's children were as numerous as stars and just as varied in brightness. Some, like Apollo and Artemis, shone with divine light and purpose. Others, like Ares, were frankly disappointing even by divine standards. Apollo, god of light, music, prophecy, healing, and archery, talk about an overachiever, drove the sun, chariot across the sky each day. His twin sister Artemis, goddess of the hunt and protector of young women, roamed the forests with her band of nymphs, turning any man who dared peek at them bathing into stags to be torn apart by their own hunting dogs. Because in Greek mythology, the punishment for voyeurism wasn't a fine or community service, it was dismemberment. Athena, Zeus's daughter, sprang fully formed from his head after he swallowed her pregnant mother Metis. Imagine the headache that must have caused. Athena became the goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and crafts, essentially the smart, competent daughter who had to clean up her father's messes. When Athens needed a patron deity, both Athena and Poseidon competed for the honour. Poseidon offered the Athenians a saltwater spring, which was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Athena created the olive tree, providing food, oil, and wood. She won, obviously, because practical gifts beat flashy but useless ones every time. Hermes, messenger of the gods and divine jack-of-all-trades, showed his character from birth. On his first day of life, he stole Apollo's sacred cattle, created the lyre from a tortoise shell, and invented fire sticks for good measure. When confronted about the theft, baby Hermes lied so convincingly that Zeus was torn between admiration and concern for his son's moral compass. Hermes eventually became god of travellers, merchants, thieves, and anyone else who lived by their wits. Essentially, he was the divine patron of both those who played by the rules and those who knew exactly how to bend them without breaking. Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and theatre, had perhaps the strangest birth of all the Olympians. He was the son of Zeus and Semele, the woman reduced to ashes by Zeus's divine form. As she burned, Zeus snatched the unborn child from her womb and sewed the fetus into his thigh, carrying it to term himself. This makes Dionysus the only god born twice, once from a mortal woman and once from an immortal father's leg. In celebration of this uniquely bizarre birth, his followers, the Maenads, would work themselves into such frenzied ecstasy during their revels that they would tear apart live animals, and sometimes unfortunate humans, with their bare hands. Ancient Greek wine festivals were not for the faint of heart. Aphrodite, born from sea foam mixed with divine blood, was so beautiful that Zeus feared her charms would cause war among the gods. His solution? Force her to marry Hephaestus, the lame, sooty god of the forge. This arranged marriage between the goddess of beauty and the physically imperfect craftsman might seem cruel, but Hephaestus got his own form of revenge. After catching Aphrodite cheating on him with Ares, he crafted an invisible, unbreakable net and trapped the lovers in bed together, then invited all the other gods to come laugh at their naked embarrassment. Now, we can't talk about Greek mythology without mentioning Hades and Persephone, history's most famous case of Stockholm Syndrome disguised as a love story. Hades, lord of the underworld, fell in love with Persephone, daughter of Demeter, the goddess of agriculture. Rather than sending flowers or asking for her number, Hades opted for the direct approach. He split open the earth, charged out in his chariot, grabbed the screaming maiden, and dragged her down to his gloomy kingdom. Demeter, understandably distraught at her daughter's disappearance, wandered the earth searching for her. In her grief, she neglected her duties, causing plants to wither and die. Humans began to starve, and Zeus, realizing that dead worshippers offer significantly fewer sacrifices, ordered Hades to return Persephone. There was just one small complication. Persephone had eaten 6 pomegranate seeds while in the underworld. According to divine law, anyone who consumes food in the realm of the dead must remain there. A compromise was reached. Persephone would spend 6 months each year with Hades, 1 month for each seed eaten, and 6 months with her mother. This is why we have seasons. When Persephone returns to the surface, Demeter rejoices and plants bloom. When she descends again, Demeter mourns and vegetation dies. All because Hades couldn't figure out appropriate dating etiquette. The Greeks had a god or goddess for practically everything. Hypnos, god of sleep, whose gentle embrace you're hopefully feeling by now, had a twin brother named Thanatos, the god of death. The ancients saw sleep as a small, temporary death, which might explain why you sometimes drool on your pillow with all the dignity of a corpse. Morpheus, son of Hypnos, was the god of dreams. He would shapeshift to appear in human dreams, often taking the form of loved ones. So the next time you dream about your high school crush, or that weird neighbour with the questionable hygiene, you can blame Morpheus for the midnight visitation. Now, let's travel beyond the divine soap opera of Olympus and explore some of the mortal heroes whose tales have endured for millennia. These were the ancient Greek equivalent of superheroes, except instead of radiation or genetic mutations, their powers usually came from divine parentage or cosmic favour. And rather than fighting alien invasions, they mostly battled monsters. fulfilled prophecies, and tried not to tick off the gods too much, with varying degrees of success. Heracles, or Hercules, if you prefer the Roman name, was the ultimate Greek hero, known for his incredible strength and equally incredible capacity for tragic decision-making. As Zeus's son by a mortal woman, Heracles was despised by Hera from birth. The goddess of marriage wasn't about to send baby shower gifts to her husband's illegitimate offspring. When Heracles was just an infant, Hera sent 2 enormous snakes to kill him in his crib. The baby, displaying the kind of problem-solving skills that would characterize his later career, simply grabbed 1 snake in each tiny hand and strangled them. His terrified mortal parents probably realized then that raising a demigod wasn't going to be like the parenting books described. As an adult, Heracles married a princess named Megara and had several children. Life seemed good until Hera, still holding that divine grudge, drove him temporarily insane. In his madness, Heracles murdered his wife and children, thinking they were enemies. When sanity returned and he realized what he'd done, his grief was overwhelming. To atone for this horrific crime, the Oracle of Delphi ordered him to serve his cousin, King Eurystheus, for 12 years, performing whatever tasks were demanded of him. These became the famous 12 Labours of Heracles, a series of seemingly impossible tasks designed to get the hero killed. He had to slay the Nemean lion, whose hide was impervious to weapons. He had to defeat the Hydra, a serpent that grew 2 heads whenever one was cut off. He had to clean the Augean stables, which housed thousands of immortal cattle that had been producing divine manure for decades without a single mucking out. Perhaps the most ridiculous labour was capturing Cerberus, the 3-headed guard dog of the underworld. This wasn't a matter of leaving a trail of treats and whistling. It required Heracles to physically enter the land of the dead, fight the monstrous hound bare-handed, and drag it back to the surface, all without using weapons. Surprisingly, Hades was rather sporting about the whole affair, allowing Heracles to borrow Cerberus on the condition that he use no weapons and return the dog unharmed. Apparently, even the Lord of the Dead respected a good divine fetch quest. After completing his labours, Heracles had numerous other adventures, including joining the Argonauts in their quest for the Golden Fleece. His life, though filled with glory, never lacked tragedy. His second wife, Deianira, accidentally caused his death by giving him a shirt soaked in what she thought was a love potion, but was actually the poisonous blood of the centaur Nessus. As Heracles burned alive from the poison, Zeus took pity on his suffering son and brought him to Olympus, making him an immortal god. The moral of Heracles' story seems to be that even if you're the strongest person alive, you're still not immune to family drama, mental health crises, and laundry-related disasters. Another famous hero was Perseus, whose story begins with his grandfather receiving a prophecy that his grandson would kill him. To prevent this, the grandfather locked his daughter Danae in a bronze chamber. Zeus, ever the opportunist, visited her in the form of golden rain that fell through a small crack in the ceiling. 9 months later, Perseus was born, proving that divine restraining orders were clearly needed in ancient Greece. Furious but unwilling to directly kill his daughter and grandson, the grandfather set them adrift at sea in a wooden chest. They survived, because protagonists in Greek myths usually do, and washed up on a distant shore where they were taken in by a kindly fisherman. Years later, the local king, desiring Danae for himself, tried to get rid of Perseus by sending him on an impossible quest to bring back the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned people to stone. This was essentially the ancient Greek equivalent of sending someone to buy a left-handed screwdriver or striped paint, except with a much higher mortality rate. Against all odds, Perseus received divine help. Athena gave him a polished shield to use as a mirror, allowing him to see Medusa without looking at her directly. Hermes provided a curved sword that could slice through her scaly neck. The nymphs contributed a bag to safely carry the head, winged sandals for flight, and a cap of invisibility. With these magical accessories, the ancient equivalent of shopping at a divine sharper image catalogue, Perseus succeeded in beheading Medusa while she slept. On his journey home, Perseus spotted the beautiful princess Andromeda, chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea monster. Because no hero can pass up a damsel in distress, especially one conveniently presented in such an unambiguous rescue scenario, Perseus slew the monster and freed Andromeda. They married and lived happily ever after, or as happily as possible in a world where gods regularly transformed people into plants and animals on a whim. And yes, Perseus eventually fulfilled the prophecy by accidentally killing his grandfather with a stray discus during athletic games. The moral: prophecies in Greek mythology are like cosmic GPS systems. You might take detours, but you'll reach the predicted destination eventually. Then there's Theseus, the great hero of Athens, who volunteered to be part of the human tribute sent to Crete to feed the Minotaur. This bull-headed monster lived in the center of the labyrinth, an impossibly complex maze designed by Daedalus. The Minotaur itself was the product of Queen Pasiphae's unnatural passion for a sacred bull, enabled by Daedalus, who built a hollow wooden cow for the queen to hide inside. The family dynamics of the Cretan royal house give even the Olympians a run for their money in the dysfunction department. Ariadne, daughter of the Cretan king, fell in love with Theseus and gave him a ball of string to unravel as he entered the labyrinth, allowing him to find his way back after slaying the Minotaur. This is perhaps history's most famous example of a woman literally having to explain to a man how to not get lost. After his victory, Theseus sailed away with Ariadne, but abandoned her on the island of Naxos, either because he forgot about her, seriously, or because Dionysus demanded her for himself. Either way, it was a poor thank you for the woman who saved his life with her quick thinking and ball of string. Theseus had numerous other adventures, including participating in battles against the Amazons and the Centaurs, attempting to kidnap Persephone from the underworld — it didn't go well — and unintentionally causing his father's suicide when he forgot to change his ship's sails from black to white upon his triumphant return from Crete. That's right. Ancient Greece's greatest hero let his father think he was dead because he forgot to follow the most basic instructions. Even demigods, apparently, could benefit from post-it notes. No discussion of Greek heroes would be complete without mentioning Odysseus, the cleverest of the Greek leaders during the Trojan War. While others relied on strength or divine parentage, Odysseus used his wits to survive. He's the hero who came up with the idea of the Trojan horse, the original too-good-to-be-true gift that allowed the Greeks to finally conquer Troy after a decade-long siege. His real troubles began after the war, when his journey home turned into a 10-year odyssey filled with monsters, enchantresses, and divine temper tantrums. He blinded the Cyclops Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, earning the sea god's undying enmity. He resisted the song of the sirens by having his crew tie him to the mast while they plugged their ears with wax. He navigated between Scylla, a six-headed monster, and Charybdis, a massive whirlpool, the original between a rock and a hard place scenario. During his travels, Odysseus spent 7 years as the captive lover of the nymph Calypso, and a year with the sorceress Circe, who turned his men into pigs. The fact that his wife Penelope remained faithful during his 20-year absence, fending off over 100 suitors through clever delaying tactics, suggests that ancient Greek concepts of relationship equity were somewhat flexible. When Odysseus finally reached Ithaca, he disguised himself as a beggar to assess the situation before revealing his identity. He then slaughtered all of his wife's suitors in a bloodbath that would make modern action movies seem tame by comparison. The moral of the Odyssey might well be, don't eat a man's food, drink his wine, and hit on his wife for years, or he might come back and turn his dining hall into a slaughterhouse. Greek mythology wasn't just about gods and heroes, it was filled with monsters that haunted the shadows of the ancient world. We've already mentioned the Minotaur and Medusa, but they were just the tip of the mythological iceberg. The Sphinx, with the head of a woman, body of a lion, and wings of an eagle, sat outside Thebes asking riddles of travellers. Those who failed to answer correctly were devoured on the spot, making her perhaps history's deadliest game show host. When Oedipus correctly answered her famous riddle, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening, the Sphinx was so distraught at being outsmarted that she threw herself off a cliff. Apparently, even monsters have their pride. The chimera combined parts of lion, goat, and snake into one fire-breathing package of terror. The hero Bellerophon, mounted on the winged horse Pegasus, defeated this monstrosity by lodging a lead-tipped spear in its throat. When the chimera breathed fire, the lead melted and suffocated the beast from the inside out. Sometimes, the cleverest weapon isn't the sharpest or strongest, but the one with the lowest melting point. Typhon, the most fearsome monster in Greek mythology, was so terrifying that most of the Olympians fled in panic when he attacked, transforming themselves into animals to escape. Only Zeus stood his ground, engaging the 100-headed, serpent-bodied horror in a battle that shook the cosmos. Zeus eventually prevailed, burying Typhon under Mount Etna, where his rage and struggles were said to cause earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Next time you hear about seismic activity in Sicily, just remember it's probably an ancient monster, having a bad day. The ancient Greeks also gave us cautionary tales about the dangers of human arrogance. Arachne was a mortal weaver who boasted that her skills surpassed even those of Athena, goddess of crafts. Athena, disguised as an old woman, gave Arachne a chance to retract her boast. When the mortal refused, they engaged in a weaving contest. Arachne's tapestry, which depicted the god's various misdeeds and transgressions, was flawless in execution if questionable in subject matter. Athena, enraged either by the girl's skill or by her choice of embarrassing divine scenes, destroyed the tapestry and struck Arachne with her shuttle. Overcome with shame, Arachne hanged herself. Athena, perhaps feeling a twinge of remorse, transformed the girl into a spider, allowing her to weave for all eternity. Next time you hesitate before squashing a spider, remember that it might be a talented artist who just happened to tick off the wrong goddess. Icarus and his father Daedalus, yes, the same master craftsman who designed the labyrinth, were imprisoned in a tower by the king of Crete. To escape, Daedalus created wings from feathers, wax, and twine. Before their flight over the sea, he warned his son not to fly too close to the sun, which would melt the wax, or too close to the sea, which would dampen the feathers. Icarus, intoxicated by the sheer joy of flight, soared higher and higher, ignoring his father's warnings. The sun melted the wax binding his wings, and he plummeted into the sea and drowned. This tale has given us one of literature's most enduring metaphors for the dangers of hubris and the tragic consequences of ignoring practical advice from those with more experience. It's also perhaps the earliest documented case of a teenager not listening to his dad with fatal results. King Midas learned a similar lesson about being careful what you wish for. When offered a reward by Dionysus for an act of kindness, Midas requested that everything he touched be turned to gold. Initially delighted by his new power, his joy turned to horror when he discovered that everything included food, drink, and even his beloved daughter. Unable to eat, drink, or embrace his child, Midas begged Dionysus to take back the gift. The god instructed him to wash in the river Pactolus, which carried away his golden touch and became known for its gold deposits. Ancient Greeks, inventing both cautionary tales and geological explanations in one neat package. Speaking of transformation, few fates in Greek mythology were as tragic as that of Echo, a mountain nymph cursed by Hera, yes, her again, to lose her voice, except to repeat the last words spoken by others. Her punishment came after she helped Zeus hide his affairs by distracting Hera with endless chatter. In her diminished state, Echo fell in love with the beautiful youth Narcissus, but could not speak to him. When she finally revealed herself, he cruelly rejected her. Echo, heartbroken, wasted away until only her voice remained, still lingering in caves and valleys. Narcissus himself was punished for his cruelty by Nemesis, goddess of retribution, who caused him to fall in love with his own reflection in a pool. Unable to tear himself away from his beautiful image, he eventually died gazing at himself, and was transformed into the flower that bears his name. From these myths, we get two psychological terms, narcissism and echolalia, proving that ancient Greek storytelling continues to echo through our modern understanding of human behaviour. Orpheus, the legendary musician whose songs could charm, stones and tame wild beasts, embarked on perhaps mythology's most famous rescue mission when his wife Eurydice died from a snake bite. Unwilling to accept her death, Orpheus descended to the underworld, his music so moving that even Hades and Persephone were touched. They agreed to let Eurydice return to the land of the living on one condition: Orpheus must lead her out without looking back until they reached the surface. Just steps away from daylight, Orpheus, overcome with anxiety or doubt, turned to make sure his wife was still following. In that instant, she was pulled back to the underworld forever. This tale reminds us that sometimes the hardest part of faith is that final step, that moment when we must trust without verification. It's also a reminder that the Greek gods were sticklers for the fine print in their agreements. After losing Eurydice a second time, Orpheus wandered in grief, rejecting the company of women. This angered the Maenads, female followers of Dionysus, who tore him limb from limb in a drunken frenzy. Even in death, his head continued to sing as it floated down the river Hebrus to the sea. His lyre became the constellation Lyra, a reminder that art endures even when the artist is gone. The ancient Greeks viewed fate as an immutable force, more powerful even than the gods. The three Moirai, or fates, controlled the thread of every mortal life. Clotho spun the thread, Lachesis measured it, and Atropos cut it, determining the length of each person's life. Not even Zeus could alter their decisions without endangering the cosmic order. This belief in inescapable destiny is perhaps best illustrated by the story of Oedipus. When his parents, the king and queen of Thebes, learned from an oracle that their son would kill his father and marry his mother, they ordered a servant to expose the infant on a mountainside. A shepherd found the baby and brought him to the childless king and queen of Corinth, who raised him as their own. Years later, Oedipus learned of the prophecy, and believing the Corinthian royals were his biological parents, fled to avoid fulfilling it. On the road, he encountered an older man at a crossroads. After a dispute over right of way, the ancient Greek equivalent of road rage, Oedipus killed the stranger, who was, of course, his biological father. Continuing to Thebes, Oedipus found the city plagued by the Sphinx. After solving her riddle and causing her suicide, he was welcomed as a hero and offered both the throne and the hand of the recently widowed queen, his actual mother. Years later, when a plague struck Thebes, the oracle revealed that it was punishment for harbouring the killer of the old king. As Oedipus investigated, the horrifying truth emerged. Upon learning that he had indeed killed his father and married his mother, he gouged out his own eyes in despair, while his mother-wife hanged herself. The Greeks saw Oedipus not as some perverted villain, but as a victim of fate, a man who did everything possible to avoid his destiny, only to run headlong into it. His story reminds us that the oracle at Delphi's famous maxim, "Know thyself," carried layers of meaning, and sometimes terrible consequences. Another famous prophecy involved Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior of the Trojan War. His mother, the sea nymph Thetis, dipped him in the river Styx as an infant to make him invulnerable. However, she held him by the heel, which remained his one vulnerable spot. Forewarned that he would either live a long, unremarkable life or die young but achieve eternal glory, Achilles chose the latter path, joining the expedition against Troy. After years of fighting, Achilles was killed when the Trojan prince Paris shot an arrow that struck him in his unprotected heel, giving us the term Achilles' heel for a fatal weakness. Like so many Greek heroes, Achilles found that you can run from fate for a while, but eventually it finds your vulnerable spot. The Trojan War itself began with a divine beauty contest. At the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, Achilles' parents, all gods and goddesses were invited except Eris, goddess of discord. Insulted by this snub, Eris tossed a golden apple inscribed "For the fairest" among the guests. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite all claimed the prize, Zeus wisely refusing to judge. Between his wife, daughter, and, well, whatever Aphrodite was to him, Greek divine relationships are complicated, delegated the decision to Paris, a prince of Troy. Each goddess offered him bribes. Hera promised political power, Athena offered wisdom and military glory, and Aphrodite promised him the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris, thinking with the wrong part of his anatomy, chose Aphrodite's gift. The most beautiful woman in the world happened to be Helen, already married to Menelaus, king of Sparta. With Aphrodite's help, Paris seduced and abducted Helen, taking her back to Troy. Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon raised an army from all over Greece to retrieve her, beginning a 10-year siege that would end with Troy's destruction. All because a goddess wasn't invited to a wedding. Next time you're making your guest list, remember that leaving someone out might not just create awkward conversation, but could launch wars that echo through the ages. The Trojan War dragged on for a decade, with heroes rising and falling on both sides. Achilles, after his friend Patroclus was killed by the Trojan prince Hector, went into a berserker rage. He slaughtered Trojans by the dozen, finally confronting and killing Hector in single combat. Still consumed by grief and rage, Achilles tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it around the walls of Troy for 12 days, until King Priam, Hector's elderly father, came alone to the Greek camp to beg for his son's remains. This meeting, between the greatest Greek warrior and the king of his enemies, is one of the most poignant moments in ancient literature. Achilles, seeing his own father in the grieving Priam, relented and returned Hector's body for proper funeral rites. Even in the midst of brutal warfare, the Greeks understood that there are lines that shouldn't be crossed, moments when our shared humanity must triumph over hatred. After Achilles' death from Paris's arrow to his heel, the Greeks turned to cunning, rather than force. Odysseus conceived the plan for the Trojan horse, a massive wooden horse presented as a peace offering, but secretly filled with Greek soldiers. The Trojans, despite warnings from the prophet Cassandra, cursed by Apollo to always speak true prophecies that no one would believe, brought the horse inside their walls. Under cover of night, the hidden Greeks emerged, opened the city gates for their army, and Troy fell in a night of fire and slaughter. The fall of Troy was brutal even by ancient standards. King Priam was cut down at Zeus's altar, proving that even sacred spaces offer little protection when humans abandon all restraint. Hector's infant son, Astyanax, was thrown from the city walls to ensure no heir to Troy survived. The Trojan women were divided among the Greek leaders as slaves and concubines. Helen, whose face had launched 1,000 ships, returned to Sparta with Menelaus, who either forgave her or accepted her claim that she had been abducted against her will, depending on which version of the myth you prefer. The gods themselves weren't much better than the mortals when it came to pettiness and vengeance. Apollo and Artemis, the divine twins, slaughtered the 14 children of Niobe because she boasted that having more children made her superior to their mother Leto. In what world is murdering 14 innocent children an appropriate response to someone's mother being insulted? Only in the morally flexible realm of Greek mythology. Or consider poor Actaeon, a hunter who accidentally stumbled upon Artemis bathing in a forest pool. His crime? Seeing the goddess naked, not deliberately, not with malicious intent, just bad timing and worse luck. Artemis's punishment? She transformed him into a stag, and his own hunting dogs tore him to pieces. Divine justice in Greek mythology operated on a hair trigger and with disproportionate consequences. Atreus and Thyestes, twin brothers competing for the throne of Mycenae, established family dysfunction as an art form. When Thyestes seduced Atreus' wife, Atreus pretended to reconcile with his brother, inviting him to a banquet. The main course? Thyestes' own sons, cooked and served to their unsuspecting father. When Thyestes discovered the truth, he vomited up the remains and cursed his brother's house, a curse that would follow the family for generations, culminating in the tragic stories of Agamemnon and Orestes. Speaking of Agamemnon, leader of the Greek forces at Troy, his homecoming proved that war wasn't the only danger heroes faced. His wife Clytemnestra, still furious that he had sacrificed their daughter Iphigenia to gain favourable winds for the journey to Troy, had taken a lover during his absence. Together they murdered Agamemnon in his bath on the very day of his return. Their son Orestes was then faced with an impossible moral choice: avenge his father by killing his mother, or allow his father's murder to go unpunished. With Apollo's encouragement, he chose vengeance, slaying both Clytemnestra and her lover. The Furies, ancient goddesses who punished blood crimes, especially those against family, pursued him relentlessly until Athena intervened, establishing the first homicide court in Athens to try his case. The jury deadlocked, and Athena cast the deciding vote for acquittal, establishing the principle that when evidence and arguments were equal, mercy should prevail. Not all myths were quite so bloody. Baucis and Philemon, an elderly couple living in poverty, welcomed two strangers into their humble home, sharing what little food and wine they had. The strangers were Zeus and Hermes in disguise, testing the hospitality of humans. Impressed by the couple's generosity despite their poverty, the gods revealed themselves and offered to grant the couple a wish. Baucis and Philemon asked only to die together when their time came, so neither would have to live without the other. Zeus granted their wish and more, transforming their home into a magnificent temple where they served as priests. When they eventually died of old age, they were transformed into intertwining trees, together for eternity. In a mythology filled with betrayal and suffering, their simple love story stands out as a reminder that sometimes the gods did reward virtue. Even the underworld had its love stories. When Hades abducted Persephone, her time in the underworld changed her. She arrived as a frightened maiden, but grew into a powerful queen in her own right, governing the dead alongside her husband. While modern interpretations often portray her as a victim, ancient Greeks saw a more complex figure who found power in her dual nature, moving between light and darkness, between her mother's world of growth and her husband's realm of endings. She became a symbol of life's cycles and the inevitable transitions we all face. The rivers of the underworld each had their own properties. The Styx, most famous of all, was the river of hatred, its waters so powerful that even the gods swore their most solemn oaths by it. Drinking from the Lethe caused complete forgetfulness, a mercy for souls preparing for rebirth. The Acheron was the river of sorrow, the Phlegethon a stream of fire, and the Cocytus the river of wailing. Charon, the ancient ferryman, transported souls across these waters, but only if they could pay his fee with a coin traditionally placed in the mouth of the deceased during funeral rites. Those without payment were doomed to wander the shores for 100 years, neither able to truly die nor return to life. The judgments of the underworld were administered by 3 former kings, Minos, Rhadamanthys, and Iarchus. Souls judged as virtuous were sent to the Elysian fields, a paradise of perpetual spring, where heroes and the blessed spent eternity in happiness. The wicked were condemned to Tartarus for punishment, while average souls went to the Asphodel Meadows, a bland afterlife where they existed as mindless shades, neither suffering nor experiencing joy. For the ancient Greeks, the afterlife wasn't primarily about moral reward or punishment. It was a continuation of the status and reputation earned in life. Famous sinners in Tartarus endured personalized punishments that often reflected their crimes. Sisyphus, who had cheated death multiple times, was forced to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to have it roll back down each time he neared the top. Tantalus, who had served his son as meat at a banquet for the gods, stood in a pool of water beneath fruit trees, with both food and drink eternally just out of reach, giving us the word tantalize. Ixion, who attempted to seduce Hera, was bound to a spinning wheel of fire. The Danaids, who murdered their husbands on their wedding night, were condemned to carry water in sieves, unable to ever fill their containers. Beyond these specific realms of the dead, the Greeks imagined other afterlives for special cases. The Islands of the Blessed was the final destination for heroes who had achieved Elysium 3 times through multiple virtuous lives. The most virtuous might become guardian spirits called daimones, watching over and guiding the living. Meanwhile, those who had committed the worst offences against the gods might be subjected to special torments, like the Titans imprisoned in Tartarus, bound with unbreakable chains in eternal darkness. And so we've come full circle in our journey, through Greek mythology, from primordial chaos to the final resting places of heroes and villains. These ancient stories, with all their violence, passion, and wonder, have endured for thousands of years because they speak to something fundamental in the human experience. They remind us that even the gods struggle with jealousy, lust, and rage. They show us mortals achieving greatness through courage and cleverness, or falling through hubris and hatred. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you'll dream of Olympian feasts or heroic quests, of love stories that transcend death or monsters, lurking in labyrinths. The characters of Greek mythology, gods, heroes, and monsters alike, continue to inhabit our collective unconscious, whispering to us through art, literature, and those quiet moments when we contemplate our own very human struggles with fate and free will.